Welcome to The Explainer. We've all been there, right? That sting of being judged unfairly. Well, today we're going to dive into a text that really unpacks why that happens and offers a pretty radical perspective on who actually has the right to judge.
So let's just start with this question, because that feeling of being misunderstood or sized up incorrectly, it's a universal human experience. And that feeling is right at the center of the text we're breaking down today.
The source kicks things off with this story about a kid named Joshua. He'd been in some trouble, but he worked really hard to turn his life around. But then, the second some money goes missing at his job, boom, everyone just assumes he's back to his old ways. They judged him based on who he was, not who he was trying to become.
All right, so here's our roadmap. We're going to start with the judgment trap, then talk about playing for a higher audience, figure out who the one true judge is, and wrap it all up with a call to empathy. Let's get into it.
Okay, first up, the judgment trap. We're going to look at what the source presents as the absolute core rule here, which is, a pretty direct command not to judge other people.
And the text bases its entire argument on this one line. It's super direct, totally unambiguous. It's not presented as a friendly suggestion, but as a really clear fundamental instruction. And then, to explain why human judgment is so shaky, the source uses this wild metaphor. It basically asks, why are you so obsessed with the tiny little speck of sawdust in your friend's eye when you've got a giant wooden plank sticking out of your own? The point is, we're usually completely blind to our own stuff. So if we're not supposed to be so focused on judging everybody else, what should we be focusing on? Well, that brings us right into our second section, this idea of playing for a higher audience. The source holds up the story of Daniel as a perfect example of this. I mean, think about it. As a teenager, he decides he's going to be faithful, and that very same conviction guides him decades later when he's literally facing death. The key takeaway the text wants us to see is that his choices were all about faithfulness, not about worrying what other people would do to him. Now get this. This whole idea is captured perfectly in an analogy from the legendary football coach Vince Lombardi. His players said they weren't playing for the fans in the stands or for the newspapers. Nope, they were playing for the coach's eyes. You see the parallel? Just like Daniel, what mattered wasn't the judgment of the crowd, but the approval of that one single authoritative figure. And the text connects this directly to the idea of living for the Father's eyes.
All right, let's get into the theological solution that the text offers. If it's not our job to be the judge, then whose job is it?
And the source couldn't be clearer on this. It points right to this verse, saying that the role of judge isn't for us, and it isn't even for God the Father. In this view, it is exclusively handed over to Jesus the Son. Now this is where it gets really interesting. Look at this contrast. On one side, you have human judgment, which is described as being totally flawed based only on how things look on the surface. But on the other side, you have divine judgment, which is presented as perfect because it's based on knowing what's actually in our hearts. The source then brings in this specific theological idea called investigative judgment. You can kind of think of it as a process with two big goals. First, it shows who is considered worthy, and second, it basically explains and justifies God's fairness in saving people who have faith. And this passage really hammers the point home. It makes this bold claim that there's only one lawgiver and judge, and then it turns right around and asks this really sharp personal question. But you, who are you to judge your neighbor? So, that's a lot of theology. But how does any of this actually apply to our day-to-day lives? Well, that's our final section. It's a call to empathy. The text gets super practical here, giving some really direct advice, especially for navigating social situations. It's about simple, concrete things like making sure people feel included, shutting down gossip when it starts, and just looking past appearances so you don't shut people out. And this is the warning that's sitting underneath this whole discussion. The source is basically saying that judgment is like a boomerang. The standard you use on other people, whether it's harsh criticism or generous grace, that is the exact same standard that's going to be applied right back to you. The text finishes up with this beautiful proverb that just says it all, doesn't it? It's a timeless plea for empathy, a call to at least try to understand where someone is coming from before we even think about evaluating them. And so this is the final thought the text leaves us with. It's a challenge, really. It shifts the focus away from everyone else's flaws and puts the spotlight right back on us, on our own perception. It asks us to make a choice. Are we going to look at the world through a lens of judgment or one of grace?